A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm glad you're with us on the program today. Join me in just a moment or two, Amy Swear of the Heritage Foundation, who was one of those giving testimony during the House committee hearing yesterday on gun violence and gun control, shortly before the House approved a sweeping set of gun control measures that will go nowhere in the Senate. A performative vote, and according to Amy, very much a politically charged hearing, which was my takeaway from the floor speeches, by the way, last night as well, before these votes were held. Like, you could... This wasn't a debate. It wasn't a floor debate. It was supposed to be 2 hours of debate, but it really wasn't. It was Democrats accusing Republicans of not caring about kids, putting the cash from the gun lobby ahead of human lives. And it was Republicans talking about how the proposals from the Democrats aren't going to actually do anything to stop the type of crimes that we're supposedly trying to address. After the debate, again, the debate was held, the House ended up holding a series of votes. Most Democrats, I think all but four, ended up supporting all or some of the measures that they were putting forth. And most Democrats opposed. Most Republicans opposed. I think a couple of the gun control votes managed to get like 10 Republican House votes, which not a good sign for the gun control activists who are going to get 10 Republican senators to go along with the deal. But that's probably a discussion for next week. No deal has been reached at this point anyway, so we don't have any specifics to talk about from that perspective. But we do have a lot to talk about regarding that House hearing, and not only what the Democrats want to focus on, but what we really should be talking about, and those areas of agreement that we've actually found that Democrats don't want to act on, even though we all sort of agree, yeah, this is important. Yeah, this matters. This means something. But Democrats say, no, not until we pass these gun control laws. Anyway, take a look and a listen to our conversation with the Heritage Foundation's Amy Swear. Amy, thanks so much for coming on the program today. And first of all, I want to thank you for your testimony yesterday during what was... listen, I think the deck was obviously stacked against those who oppose the House gun control measures. This was not designed to be a fair hearing, but you and other, Second Amendment supporters went into the lion's den, and I thought you handled yourself very, very well during yesterday's testimony.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Cam, and I in a great sense agree. You just look at the setup of the hearing. Very lopsided, when you're 5v1 on each panel. This is not set up to be something where you want to have meaningful discussions. I think you look at not all of the members, but a lot of the members, especially from the Democratic side, just the questions that they asked, even just the opening statements from the chairwoman, just some of the things that were put into there that were blatant falsehoods. The tone has been, like I said in my opening statement, it's predictable. This whole thing was predictable, and it's heartbreaking because this does matter. This matters to you. It matters to me. We live in the same nation. Our parents teach in the same schools. Our kids go to the same schools. We live and work in the same places. We're not unaffected by this. We just care enough to say when the laws you're proposing won't work. And we continue pointing that out. And we continue being told the only reason you oppose this is because you hate kids. Not because there might be something wrong with the laws that we proposed, or there might be better alternatives, but how dare you? It's that you hate kids. And it is predictable, and it's disheartening.
It is disheartening, and it is utterly predictable. And again, I think it takes us further away from doing things of substance, doing things that could actually make a difference here. And no, it wouldn't involve, banning guns or banning magazines or telling 21-year-olds or 20-year-olds, you're not old enough to buy this firearm yet. but again, that's not the focus. That's not the interest. And I think that, tell me if you agree with me or not, because having watched this unfold over the past couple of weeks, I was in Houston at the NRA meeting. I, heard Beto O'Rourke, heard David Hogg, saw the protesters. I get the sense that for Democrats in Washington, D.C., this is all about the politics. And they're looking for a political solution. And frankly, I think they're looking for a political solution to their woes in November, more than they are looking for a real avenue of substantive agreement. Again, probably not on guns, but on mental health, on school security, on a number of other issues. And they are willing to leave all of that aside so they can try to use gun control as a cudgel against Republicans between now and Election Day.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, to some extent, this has always been an issue with gun control advocates. It's very hard to get away from those standard talking points because they do sell politically. I think just the way over the last couple of decades, the state of existing laws, the state of reality of gun violence has been so mischaracterized in the public imagination that it is very easy to sell those talking points to a manipulated public who just really doesn't understand and doesn't care to listen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And especially you add into that the emotional charge that comes after very clearly horrific tragedies like Buffalo, like Uvalde, like Tulsa, which has just sort of been swept under the rug. No one's talking about Tulsa, it's. I think there's obviously a political component to it, but on the one hand, there's always a political component to anything you do in Congress. I will say, that this was one of the more politically charged hearings that I've been. It's the first time I've been accused of perjury for clickbait. Like the lengths that some members went to talk about anything other than the actual issues at hand, right? To go back to 2019 to pull one conversation out of context with, no intention of giving me a chance to respond or explain, but just be like perjury. So now the whole thing becomes this clickbaity nonsense so that we don't have to talk about the issues. And I think that really shows you where their hearts are at, where their minds are at. Like this is not how public policy is supposed to work.
It's not, but it unfortunately I think is how DC works, as you point out, on a all too regular basis. And listen, I don't want to spend our entire conversation here talking about that a character assassination attempt by Representative Katie Porter on you yesterday, but
nor should we, because like I said, it's beside the point. Like, please, let's talk about substance.
But would you like to explain, since Representative Porter did not give you a chance to, would you like to explain why she's wrong when she said that you were lying about what Representative David Cicilline's ban on so-called assault weapons would do?
Look, this idea that just because you've grandfathered in a very vague way, you've grandfathered in pre-existing guns, does not mean that when you look at the rest of the bill in context, there are not a dozen other ways that otherwise law-abiding gun owners are very much at risk, immediately at risk of, within the blink of an eye, becoming felons for basic things that, again, come down to possessing features, whether it's pistol grips or, magazines that you think aren't good anymore. It is incredible to me that anybody could look at that bill seriously and not understand how at risk otherwise law-abiding, peaceable gun owners are for a piece grip or a magazine that you no longer think is constitutional. It's absurd, but it's, again, it's why she didn't want the answer to the question. She actually doesn't care to know how dangerous that bill could be for peaceable citizens. That it was never the point.
No, any more than, talking about what we've seen in states that have, I mean, look, you talk about the grandfather clause, and we've seen this from California, from New Jersey. Democrats have no trouble whatsoever going back and saying, oh, you know what, we're going to amend this law. We're going to take out that grandfather clause. And now those, in the case of California, New Jersey, these magazines that you've lawfully possessed for decades, well, now it's going to be a crime if you don't turn them over, if you don't destroy them, if you don't get them out of the state.
What they'll do is they will very vaguely and without, specifying anything to the contrary, say, okay, well, large, quote unquote, large capacity magazines, those are grandfathered in. The possession is grandfathered in. for the owner. So if your wife even so much as takes possession of your gun with its high capacity magazine, you've now conducted a transfer, an illegal transfer. She is now in illegal possession of that high capacity magazine. People are like, oh no, that was never the intent. If it's not the intent, don't have the law written in such a way that it's not at all clear that that's not prohibited, because that's what the law prohibits. Which again is entirely the point and not what she wants to hear.
Yeah.
So it's.
So let me ask you, Amy, what do you think we should be talking about here? Again, I mean, listen, Greg Stubbe, I think last night on the floor of the House pointed out that according to, I think this is the FBI's own crime statistics, there were, I think, approximately 0.3% of 18 to 20 year olds who were accused of a violent crime. And I think it was 0.013% of 18 to 20 year olds were accused of a homicide. So the idea again of, we're going to target these young killers by casting young adult, that doesn't fly with me. You and I have talked before about the problems with red flag laws, these specific issues we have, but I'm curious to know, what should we be talking about instead of these gun control policies that don't get us any closer to a safer society, but do strip Americans of their right to keep and bear arms?
Right. So, I mean, it's a comprehensive solution. And I think this was something that got lost on a lot of members yesterday. It was, it's not one thing specific. It's not, one thing. It's all of these things combined, because violence is very, it's complex in nature. There is no one solution. But so you look at the different components, right? So we know that one of the things that has almost certainly increased violent crime and led to that increase in violent crime in a lot of states and localities, but some cities in particular, was some of the lack of policing, if you will. Whether it's you look at it from rogue prosecutor standpoints, I think there's a whole lot of evidence for that, where you fail to enforce the law, where you tell communities that police are evil. It breaks that bond of trust. You need to rebuild that bond of trust. You need to rebuild a lot of these decimated police forces, because that matters. Is that a hard thing for the federal government to step up and be like, yeah, we can enforce federal laws, but we can't make state and local prosecutors do the same? Yes, but it's still part of the conversation that needs to be had. If you want to talk about specifically preventing tragedies like Uvalde, what was mind-blowing to me is we will talk about universal background checks until the cows come home. These shooters, with, again, perhaps one exception in the last 20 years, already passed or were capable of passing background checks. Would not have stopped a single one of them. What almost certainly would have saved 21 lives in Uvalde, but keeps getting locked, is a single locked door. And again, that's not to blame the teacher. I think there's very clear evidence at this point that the teacher thought the door was locked. But had that door been locked, the cops are now confronting that kid outside of the school instead of inside of the school while he's barricading himself into a classroom. That's a very different context to confront. Again, is that always going to save lives? No. Has it prevented at least a couple that I'm aware of in just the last year where someone was prevented from getting inside of the school? Yes, this is important. These are features that you walk into the halls of Congress. You just can't walk into any unlocked door. People will be like, oh, well, we don't want to make our schools into prisons. Do you feel like you work in a prison when you walk into an office building that has secure access points and limited points of public entry? No, of course not. There are ways of overdoing it, but these are basic components of physical security. One of the things that we all agreed on, basically everybody on all of these panels agreed on, was investing in the nation's mental health infrastructure, especially in schools. We have $100 billion in unused COVID relief spending that has already been appropriated to schools. This is not new money. This is money that's already sitting there. Allow schools to use it to fund, not CRT, not sort of licensed mental health professionals. Give these kids mental health resources. Give them a lifeline. Give their peers, a way to report to people who are better capable of understanding risk assessment. Use the resources that we have at the federal level to train states and localities who often don't have their own sort of behavioral risk assessment or threat assessment frameworks. Train them in the things that we know work, so that we don't have scenarios like Parkland and Uvalde where everyone is seeing these signs, but there's no like coherent local framework to be like, yeah, that kid seems like a threat, given that his nickname on his social media platform is Uvalde's school shooter. Things like that are, I don't know why there's any disagreement on this. Even if you think that, we want to run all high capacity magazines out of circulation over the next several decades, what are you doing right now? What are you doing in the meantime?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, and you say there was even agreement during the hearing yesterday that this is something that we need to be focused on and something that we need to be doing. And yet again, Democrats are like, no, not until we have gun control. Which it is infuriating. And, I got to tell you, I mean, this is something that I have thought a lot about over the past couple of years, in particular since the start of the pandemic. And we've seen our kids, pulled out of school. My daughter tried to do remote learning for 9 weeks. It was an absolute disaster. We ended up homeschooling her for a year. But, my kids have been in counseling just because of the stresses of life over the past couple of years, COVID related, their mom being sick. And I think that we are in a cycle right now where we are sort of looking at, one narrow slice of the problem when instead of looking at the entire elephant, so to speak, right? So somebody's over there, I'm feeling like it sounds like a snake, and they're looking at the tail or feeling the tail.
Right.
But I talk about these deaths of despair. And I would include the 19 children and the 2 teachers who were murdered in Uvalde, Texas, as casualties of a death of despair. This was somebody who I believe wanted to die, wanted to take as many people with him as possible, and again was able to do so because of a series of failures. But these are isolated incidents. These are really rare occurrences. We have a much broader problem, I think, within the same umbrella of the deaths of despair of 100,000 drug overdose deaths in this country, a record high last year, 100,000 alcohol-related deaths in this country. Teen drinking deaths, teen drug overdose deaths are rising. I don't know why. And this, to me, I think is all part and parcel of the same topic, and it can all be addressed in various ways through expanded access to mental health, as you say, in the schools, outside of the schools. This is something we all agree on. So why aren't we seeing anything done here?
And it's also things. I mean, you brought up COVID, right? I don't think you can overstate the impact that the loss of a lot of these services, especially in urban communities that are most plagued by gun violence, whether it's gang violence, whether it's like formal gang violence intervention programs, or whether it's informal networks that provide kids with safe spaces and opportunities and methods of, essentially that are essential for human flourishing. So many of those things got shut down during COVID. When you want to talk about domestic violence and some of the increases that we're seeing in domestic violence, because people are stuck inside their homes without their normal outlets, without the normal methods of, having, whether it's access to resources, access to the ability to get away, access to other people who are going to see that you are being emotionally or physically abused. And then you throw on top of that all of the stress that has just come with that normally. I don't know if you've seen like the absurd number of people who are like picking fights in airports and getting thrown off airplanes and harassing flight attendants. Road rage is up. People are just on edge. Like people's threshold level for patience is and so when you add those stressors to people who are already on edge, whether it's like the kid in Uvalde, whether it's the loss of a job, whatever, it makes somebody that much more likely to sort of flip that switch into violent behavior, or to fall back into, if we're talking about more like urban-centered violence, into those sorts of behaviors. I mean, how do you talk about the absenteeism rate in schools right now is still absurd, because once you get kids behind in that way, well, of course they're not going to go back to school. Of course they'd rather be out. Like DC right now is experiencing this massive increase in juvenile carjackings, and a lot of them armed. At times when kids should be in school. This is a problem. This is not some easy, quick fix. And to pretend that, we can just say, well, let's ban the future sale of certain types of guns to 18 to 20-year-olds, and that's going to fix our problem. You don't understand the problem at that point. You haven't even begun to try to understand the problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. And I got to say, it's why I am very pessimistic that anything that comes out of Congress right now is going to be of a substantial benefit. We'll see what the Senate, if they can come to any sort of agreement. I'm all in favor, again, of expanding access to mental health. I think Chuck Grassley's EAGLES Act, which would increase funding for the National Threat Assessment Center that's run by the Secret Service, I think that would be a solid improvement. But honestly, I don't even know if that's going to be a part of the final discussion. So I guess my last question for you, Amy, is, given that this is sort of the state of the debate in Washington, D.C., do you think that states, particularly, red states, conservative run states, should they be taking the lead on doing some of these things? And have Republicans not done enough? Have Republicans paid lip service to the idea in the past of improving mental health services and then really haven't followed through? Is it time for us to step up our game on these things that we say really can make a difference?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I think it's time for everybody to step up. And I know some states have made efforts into this. I know Florida has made attempts after Parkland, and I think, frankly, to great effect. You look at like Florida school shootings and interventions. I think you're starting to see some of those better outcomes. But I think across the board, again, it's one thing to say, yeah, we need to fund something. It's another thing to actually do the work of it while still being fiscally conservative, while not going overboard, while still being responsible with taxpayer money. But again, a lot of these things that we're talking about in the long term actually are fiscally responsible. It's much more fiscally responsible to stem the problem at its source and to enable a lot more people to flourish as human beings, to thrive, to be law-abiding members of society, than it is to just let it sort of rot and be like, oh, we'll fund more prisons, and still have these problems. And so, that's not to call out any one state or, but this is something that's like, if we're going to say this, we have to be serious about this. And I think far more conservatives have to actually take that seriously and try to put that into action, into actionable policy that is actually implemented.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think Democrats need to do that too. I know you're not calling anybody out, but we can't control what Democrats do. But as conservatives, we can absolutely push our own elected representatives to do these things. And we see it in Virginia, where I live, where we've got a critical shortage of inpatient beds for people who are in crisis. Oh, yeah. You've got people who are sitting in jail cells for days at a time because there's literally no room for them at a mental health facility. It is a problem, I think, across the country. And you're right. I think it is time that we actually start to take some of this seriously. And frankly, what we're hearing from Democrats, I think, are largely very unserious proposals that don't get us any closer to a safer society, but do make us less free and, frankly, increase the danger that we might face from, violent criminals and predators in our midst. Amy, listen, I really appreciate you joining us on the program today. It is always good talking to you. It has been far too long, but I hope we get a chance to do this again very soon.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to next time.
Now, that was a beefy conversation, so I tell you what, we're going to skip today's good deed of the day, our recidivist report, but I would be remiss if I left you for the weekend without an armed citizen story. So let's talk about this case out of Tampa, Florida. Here's the headline: Tampa dating app meetup leads in robbery attempt and homicide. A woman's been arrested on a murder charge after deputies say she set up a meeting that ended with her brother being shot and killed. Tatiana Makiva Gaston, 23 years of age, arrested last Friday, charged with second-degree murder in connection with the shooting that took place back on May 31st. She was released, by the way, from jail same day she was arrested after she posted $15,000 bail. Police say that Gaston matched with a person on the dating app BLK who was posing as a 22-year-old woman named Jada. She asked the person to meet her at an apartment complex where her 18-year-old brother was waiting with the intention of robbing them. That brother, Jermon Kennard. And according to the Tampa Bay Times, when Kennard, who was wearing a mask, threatened the person with a knife, that person shot Kennard with a gun that was concealed in their waistband. Kennard taken to Tampa General Hospital, where he died of gunshot wounds to his head and to his chest. Gaston later told police that she thought her brother was going outside to sell somebody an iPhone. She said she then went outside the apartment complex to check on him and saw a guy she didn't know walking away from a car that was parked near the building. She couldn't find her brother, and she said she heard 5 gunshots. She identified the man as the, quote, boy who killed her brother. But police say that text messages contradict Gaston's story. So in that she had asked her brother to come outside before this person showed up. The Tampa Bay Times also reports that nearby motion sensor cameras captured the robbery and placed Kennard and Gaston at the scene. The knife was not visible in the footage. The shooting was not captured on video. Police say that even though she did not pull the trigger, she's still being charged in her brother's death because of a Florida statute that says when a person is killed in a felony or an attempted felony, such as a robbery, anyone involved in the crime can be charged with murder. As for the intended victim, we actually don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, it sounds like, again, this was somebody, while Gaston was posing as somebody who wanted a date, this guy was apparently posing as a 22-year-old woman who wanted a date, which raises some other questions entirely. Again, we don't know all of the circumstances surrounding this meetup, but from all accounts, it appears that the 22-year-old who shot and killed the 18-year-old suspect in self-defense is not going to be facing any charges. I don't know what charges they would be facing. Certainly not any charges in connection with acting in self-defense. And I guess catfishing or posing as a 22-year-old woman when you're actually a guy isn't a crime, although it's a little weird. Anyway, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I do appreciate you being a part of the program. Don't forget, we will be back with another Cam & Company on Monday, but we'll be constantly updating BearingArms.com Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with all of the latest Second Amendment news and information that you need to know about. And there is a lot going on these days, so I would encourage you to visit the website, check out what's going on, share all the information with your friends and fellow Second Amendment supporters. And again, I look forward to being back with you on Monday. If you like what you see at BearingArms.com, by the way, you can always become a VIP subscriber. All you have to do, go to BearingArms.com/subscribe, use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your VIP membership. As our way of saying thanks, we're going to give you exclusive content, news stories, analysis, stuff you won't get anywhere else, because it's just for you, our VIP subscribers, because your support does matter, and it does make a difference. Hope you have a great weekend. Talk to you again on Monday. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.